This afternoon, this is a repeat of announcements made earlier, but this afternoon there is an event at this is embarrassing. It's jet lag. Congregation Paul and Emmett, which is on Manuela in Palo Alto. Does anyone know where that is? The location of that? Can you just tell us briefly where it is?
You go out on Roscadero, and right after you cross Foothill, you take the first left-hand turn, and that's it.
All right. The event this afternoon is a cooperative event of the faith community in the Palo Alto area. And we've been included in that, and it is a group of natural allies for many of the issues that we're concerned about. And so I hope that those of you who can will attend. It's an interfaith convocation on climate action. From 2 until 4, there's a resource center with a number of organizations with exhibits and information about climate change issues. And then from 4 to 6, there's a program with speakers. The second announcement is an event for which we're the primary sponsor, which takes place in this space this next Saturday at 2:30 in the afternoon. We are the primary sponsor, but the ACLU chapters in the area are co-sponsors, along with the organization Americans United for Separation of Church and State. The program is a lecture by Eddie Tabash on the threat of the religious right to modern liberties. Tabash is an attorney in the LA area. This has been almost a lifelong issue for Eddie. He's been the national leadership of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. I've heard him speak on this topic. It is an event that will be well worth your attending. There are flyers here on the table by the door. I hope you'll take some of those. They've already been distributed, but if you have a favorite coffee shop or other place, please take them and distribute them as well. I know we have a promising program when I get an email from my son who gets our newsletter saying I'd like to hear the program that you have this coming Sunday. And I got such an email from my son, so I know that we have a promising program this morning. Bob Stevens, who's been a member of this community for a long time, was president in 1994. As the topic, Origins of Supernatural Beliefs. Bob is retired, probably working more than ever, but he was the head of the cell biology program at SRI 30 years. He started as a teenager. His academic background includes a master's degree from Cornell, a Ph.D. at USC, and a postdoc, did I say a master's degree at Cornell, and a postdoc at Yale. This is a program I've also really been looking forward to hearing, and I'm very glad to present Bob Stevens.
The more you read, the less I have to talk. And then I hope I can leave with can, and that's hard for me. But I want to leave enough time so we can have a good time discussing this particular issue. I also thought that it was very appropriate that I just tell you what's happening with Darwin Day as we speak almost. Because this month, this week, as a matter of fact, we're going to transfer the responsibility for promoting Darwin Day to another organization. As you may know, we've had a small nonprofit organization for about 5 years now. And the members of the board, several of our members of the Humanist Community, we decided that it's time for us to pass this on to some organization that has better longevity, and we'll be able to take this well beyond our bicentennial birthday, which will come up in just a year from now, in 2010. So we're going to be passing this on to the Institute for Humanist Studies. I guess I didn't say that. I thought almost that I had. But we're signing the paperwork, part of it today. We'll move it on, and it will be their responsibility from now on. And I think it's in good hands. And I'm most interested in seeing that Darwin Day goes on for eternity, a long time. Now, so the topic for this morning is origin of supernaturalism and its acquisition of power, how it became so powerful. There's a book called, titled The God Gene, and it asks the question, what came first, God or the need for God? I think I can make a case this morning that it's going to be that the need for God came first, and I really don't think there's any God gene. The 2 points that I want to make this morning is that when humans try to resolve problems, whether they're practical or intellectual, we have 2 ways of going about it. One is to use the scientific method, if you like, which requires empirical evidence. And the other is to generate some kind of mythology that answers the question. And I think that the reason we have God in the first place, or at least the idea of God, why we needed him, is based on the fact that our 5 senses are not very sensitive. Until we were able to extend our 5 senses with tools of modern science, we were not able to answer many of our big questions. So that is the premise on which I'm starting, and we will try to elaborate on that. I will start out by just giving some goalposts as far as one of the things that brought this about in the first place is I wanted to look at the whole arc of human existence. Going back at least a couple of 100,000 years, and how we developed. And so I'm just going to give a couple, because it is relevant as we go along. Our Homo sapiens came on this planet, or appeared on this planet, through evolution about 150 to 200,000 years ago. During the previous 3 to 5 million years, our brain size went from about 400 millimeters to 1,400 millimeters. So we had our big brains when we first evolved away from the other hominids. Then about 60 to 100,000 years ago, this is recent information from geneticists, there was a change in our vocal box and our ability to actually speak, be able to speak or develop languages came about. And that is pinpointed now somewhere between 60 and 100,000 years ago. You may know that the Neanderthals disappeared from Europe in about 30 to 45,000 years ago. So language development, to develop our languages, we have had a fairly long time, somewhere between perhaps 30 and 60,000 years. So we were developing our languages all this time. We had a big brain, and we could devise some pretty complicated questions. Yep, Okay, now, written languages, we didn't start to write until just 10 to 11,000 years ago. In Mesopotamia, the very first origins of language was discovered about 10,000 years ago. Just a year or two ago, I heard some information that said that that's been pushed back by 1,000 years in Pakistan. So the earliest known written language or written words or information leading to the thought that we had a written language goes back about 10,000 years. I happen to be taking a course in Mesopotamia at the present time, and I found it extremely interesting to see how much was developed by the time we began our agricultural stint. Agriculture, by the way, began about the same time as our language, our written language came about. So that's the goalpost that we're looking at. And I wanted to just sort of put those out there because we had a long period of time prior to our ability to write down what it was we were thinking or asking questions of. And all of that we're not privy to now. But if it isn't written down, we can only guess about it as far as the archaeologists are concerned. So over our history, humans have used two types of thinking to resolve either practical or intellectual problems, as I mentioned before: scientific thinking and mythological thinking. Scientific thinking requires the acquisition of empirical evidence. And for scientific thinking to be able to be to gain access to our brain, it has to go in via one of our five senses, one or more of our five senses. And if we can find out some empirical evidence, we can actually put it into our brains through our five senses and use it to answer any of the questions that we might have relating to the empirical evidence that we are pondering. Scientific thinking began very early in our evolution. And that's why I think that I think scientific thinking came long before, or at least somewhat before, mythological thinking. I'm not sure that there's other people that believe that or not. I haven't run across the details that I'm presenting this morning in any other writing. So it may or may not be that I'm just not knowledgeable about someone else's position on these things, but I'm putting them to use so you can find them in any case. The reason I think that scientific thinking came very early in our evolution is because we see scientific thinking in other animals as well. We see it particularly in the chimpanzee, which is our nearest living relative. By the way, I was going to mention that just very recently there's a paper that indicates that the FOXP2 gene that has to do with improvement in our vocal box so that we can actually talk has been found in the Neanderthals as well. So it's quite possible that Neanderthals had a language, but of course none of it was written down, so we don't have anything they were thinking about. I mentioned that chimpanzees exhibit some form, or at least some rudimentary aspects of scientific thinking. And I think what they do is when they choose a straight stick, they put it into a termite mound, and they pull it out, and they've got some protein there. They do that again, and it's something that they eat, and they found a way to get some food, and they try it over again, and they find out through this acquisition of information that they have a method that they can use for obtaining food. And to me, that is scientific thinking, and it's scientific acquisition of evidence, of empirical evidence. Not only that, but a smaller tribe of chimpanzees in West Africa recently was found to actually, the females would strip a long spear-like piece of wood, 3 to 4 feet long, and sharpen it at the end of it with teeth and take the bark off. But then they would use it to thrust into a hole under the trees where they knew that the bush babies stayed during the daytime. And they were able to, obtain food by killing bush babies by this spear. And that is, that's a way of acquiring empirical evidence and being able to use it, and they are teaching it to their offspring. And so that, to me, is the beginning of culture. This is new evidence, new information for their culture, and it's a new way of going about obtaining food and survival. Now, if you think of humans doing the same thing, as we evolved away from our other hominid relatives, I think humans were, with their big brains, had to use them to be able to survive. It's not easy to survive out there in the savannah, so to speak, with lions and tigers and the like, without any protection. We don't even have a nice heavy fur coat there, to ward off the animals. So we were very vulnerable. But with our big brains, we could begin using our scientific thinking and produce things like, well, we learned to be able to pick up stones and to make clubs and to use our big brain to ward off these other animals that would have dearly loved to have eaten us, I suppose. Now, that goes on year after year, and century after century, as you can tell. And I believe that all of the, it's quite evident, I think, but all of the improvements that we've made throughout our entire human life, all of those improvements that have made a difference in our lives as far as our lifestyle or our benefits that we are able to enjoy, our liberty standard increase, all came through our scientific thinking. And you can go back to I don't need to describe all of the periods from then till now, but here's very evidence of that as far as happened. Now, when we turn to mythological thinking, it seems to me that our big brains could ask really interesting questions long before we were able to write it down. The evidence of that, I suppose, is that when we did begin to write things down, much of the material that we wrote down first was about what we've been thinking about earlier. Sorry for my dribble in my throat here. What we have been thinking about earlier, and I'll go back and talk about what goes on in Mesopotamia as soon as they're able to write, as soon as we're able to learn about what they're doing. But long, long before that, probably at least 30, 40,000 years, we were able to gain on asking questions. And we had a limited ability to acquire empirical data. Our five senses, while they seem astonishingly, valuable to us, and they are, but when we want to look at the very, very little, that is, the mechanisms that make life in the first place, the atoms, the molecules, the cells, the small cells, the bacteria, the viruses, we have no idea what those are all about. And we didn't know it until really very recently. So we would ask such questions. Where did the rainbow come from? Why are we here? How did we get here? Thank you very much. So we had a long time to ponder these questions. And when somebody began to tell us that, this is probably the answer to that, we had, in primitive or people's cultures, they have such things as shaman. But before shaman, I'm sure it seems very intuitively logical that somebody said, well, I've got the answer to that. And over time, those answers that these creative people were able to give us became the idea that becomes dominant. That is, we respected their opinion. They began to establish the rules by which we had to abide. And over time, we progressed to produce people that we refer to as priests, or as ministers, or as someone who is respected for their viewpoints on being able to answer these abstract questions that we can find no data for. Now, I think it's really kind of interesting to see and try to ponder that for a long time and see how well we get from a very, very early stage of trying to answer questions through mythology to a very complex mythology. All of that took place before we were ever able to begin to write anything down. I can tell you from just studying Mesopotamia that in place were very, very complex religions by the time we got to 10,000 years ago. There were religions with multiple deities. There were religions that the gods did all the work, and they had to create people to actually do the work. They had to, be responsible for all of the things that were human in nature. And so on it went until these very small percentage of people. I look at it as a business. If you've got a business plan, and you can actually have some people who are leading the business plan, and they have the answer. They create the rules as to how we're going to have to abide by these mythologies, and they create a way in which we establish the requirement to believe in what they are telling us. Those kinds of things are called postulates. We believe in them. The human population, of which there was absolutely no one writing, it was all verbal, and they created the postulates of faith and belief. They said, those people that were developing these myths said, well, we don't have any evidence, we don't have empirical evidence, but we use that word. There's no evidence, but nevertheless, we must believe that there is a supernatural being, or that's what we came to by the time we were able to write things down, were supernatural beings. And they intended us to have faith in them. We just must believe that they have done this because we can find out no other way of answering this question, or these multiple questions. Well, you see, just take one simple example again of the rainbow. We weren't able to tell what the rainbow was until the 17th century, and Newton began to use a rainbow. It is true that the Greeks began to make a breakthrough on how to interpret the world through their philosophical viewpoints, and then through their science, their math and science. Aristotle was a very knowledgeable guy, and he was very far forward in his ability to think about biological things. But of course, then came along our Western Christianity, and it threw a blanket over all of the things that the Greeks and the Egyptians were doing for about 300 or 400 years, both before and after AD. So let me go back just for a little while to look at what was going on in Mesopotamia when we began to write down our experiences. In Mesopotamia, there were many gods. There were those that did all the work, as I mentioned before. There were those that were, the Zoroastrians that were the first to have a single god. And after we began writing these issues down, of course, we have what's recorded in the Bible. And all of us that were reared in this culture in the West learned these stories when we were really very young. And I think one of the things that makes it very difficult for our general population now to understand scientific knowledge that we've gained in the last, 150 years, go back 150, 200, 300 years. And all of that information, we still have a very hard time using it as our database because these postulates that were produced, we've tended to accept them. And we've tended to say, that our culture is made up of God-fearing people. All of us, I suspect that almost everyone in this room was exposed intensively to their religion during their very early stages of their life. And no matter how we try as we move along, it's very difficult for us to get rid of that indoctrination, even though our brains can tell us this doesn't seem to be, jiving with modern day science. But nevertheless, it's very difficult for us to actually leave the values behind. Now, during the political power of the church became enormous after we began to write. Obviously, even prior to that, those people that were the actual leaders in mythology became the political leaders. They became the solid political leaders that had taken control of our lives. They had set up the postulates that we had to believe in. They had set up all the rules of the various kinds of creeds and so on. And we, by the time we moved through to the Christian period, and as you see the Christian period evolving, you can see the Catholic Church being very political, very much involved in establishing a solid power base. And as I say, by the time you get to the Middle Ages, you really, the church has gained so much power, both political and governmental, that there was no way that all of the actions of those under this dominant, really government, we were totally controlled. Our entire freedom was given over to the aegis of the mythological producers. These mythological producers actually got trapped in their own myths. That is, priests and popes and ministers and all of those people were not able to say, hey, this is a bunch of nonsense. We have rules. And they had to believe them. They had to, kowtow to their own mythology. Elsewise, you'd be declared a heretic and burned at the stake if necessary. I happened to be reading the Spanish Inquisition here recently in Mercy. If you want to see terror produced in a population, just read about the Spanish Inquisition or any other Inquisition. So they had the power, and they were willing to use the power. They were able to use that power right up to a very recent time. So that's the way I see the power of the church being acquired through mythology that goes all the way back to when we couldn't answer questions for a very early period of time, when our big brains could ask questions, but they couldn't answer them because of our limited abilities of our five senses. I'll try and pull this to a close here pretty quickly. Let's see how it actually ends this up. I think that we've done a pretty good job of bringing you up to, here's where we're going to end it. I've got to bring Darwin back into the picture. The breaking of the power of the church began, I suppose, back in Toledo, Spain, when three religions, the Jews and the Catholics and the Muslims got together, you're right, the Muslims got together and they actually translated material got back into the Western culture. And that translation of Aristotle, in particular, but Plato and some of the others, ended up in the hands of the church. And the fact that the church actually accepted that as definitive information for another 400 years. The translations took place somewhere in the 1100s, and it wasn't until the Reformation that we began to break down the power of the church. So the power of the church began to be broken down by the return of Aristotle's science into the Western culture. Now we have the moving forward into the early stages of astronomy by Galileo and Copernicus, etc. But those were not accepted by the church. In fact, the church did not get quite put in its place until the debate at Oxford between Samuel Wilberforce and Thomas Huxley. Samuel Wilberforce was the bishop of Oxford, very powerful bishop, and he actually was going to bring heresy charges against another individual, not Darwin, but a person that had written on transformation before Darwin. And he hadn't gotten around to actually filing the papers on heresy. And so, and in fact, the gentleman died before he was actually able to file these heresy charges. And so at the debate at Oxford between Huxley and Wilberforce, the question came up as, who would have charge? Was it the scientist or was it the theologist that was going to have the responsibility, the ability, or the power to actually interpret how evolution plays out? Well, at that debate, it so happened that Huxley won the day. Wilberforce became the laughing stock of that debate. And from then on, scientists were able to take their empirical evidence and interpret it according to the laws of nature instead of the laws and dogma of the church. And I guess I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm interested in having, saying what your questions are, what your comments are, whether this gels for you or whether it doesn't gel for you. I think one of the things that humanists like to have is an argument that is detailed and definitive in its origins. Let's see. I guess we're supposed to wait for. Oh, you have one right there.
Well, I think there's a survival advantage in being scientific and developing theories about ancient people developed theories and they worked to help them survive. But there are cases where you couldn't find a theory that actually works. There's a survival advantage in trying it and developing a theory. For example, in the case of rain, what causes rain? And one theory was that there were raindrops. And and in a way, they had evidence that the theory works. Doing rain dances. Do a rain dance, and if it doesn't bring rain, the next day you dance harder. And it still doesn't rain, the next day you dance harder. Well, eventually it rains. It rains on the day that you dance the hardest. So the evidence is if you dance hard enough, the rain will come. So the other thing is that some of these theories cannot be refutable. The claim that there's a God who created the universe, there's no clear evidence that it's not so. It's just an absence of evidence. So people develop these theories, and as long as there's no better theory to make it rain, and there's no evidence that it doesn't work, the theory hangs on. So what I'm suggesting is there's a survival advantage in developing theories, and there's no clear line between a mythological theory and a scientific theory, except even it's a question of evidence. So I think that a lot of these mythologies develop because there is a survival advantage.
Well, I would say that there is a tiny grain of truth there. However, it would be a good idea not to have a 7-year job if you're going to actually produce rain by dancing every day. Particularly if there was no food maybe under the ground before you actually survive there. In any case, there is a grain of truth there. Yes.
Yeah, I generally agree with your thesis. I want to take issue with the way in which you introduced and defined scientific thinking. We've discussed this before, so you've had an opportunity to think up a response. You suggested that a chimp using a stick and thereby getting some food was one of the earliest instances of scientific thinking. I'd like to distinguish scientific thinking from learning from experience. And I think what you have described is an example of learning from experience without any understanding mentally of the process, and particularly without any ability to predict how similar behavior might lead to new knowledge, new advantage in a slightly different situation. And to illustrate what I think will be the beginning of scientific thinking, I'd like to know Humanist and his famous epiphany discovery relating to why bodies float in water. Namely, that if the weight of the water that is displaced by placing the body in it is greater than the weight of the body, then that body will float. If the weight of the body is greater than the weight of water displaced as the body is completely immersed, then the body will sink. And with that knowledge, you can do something useful about designing a little ship. You can deduce that if you make a ship with a very narrow keel and hull and load it up with a big crew and cargo, it will sink. If you make a ship with a broad hull, and you don't load it up so much, it will float. So there you've got a prediction based upon an understanding that is useful. And that, in my mind, is scientific thinking.
Well, I would say that's a good example of advanced scientific thinking, and we've been doing that for some time now. Of course, I was going to throw in the idea that our scientific thinking, as far as modern science is concerned, is not very old. In fact, it's only 150 years old since we really began to develop serious, well, I shouldn't, it doesn't all happen at one time, but our rapid advancement of modern science depended on building complex instruments. I happen to be an electron microscopist myself, so we learned a lot from morphological detail, and I'll go back to your question in just a moment. But it seems to me that prior to being able to have this advanced thinking, this advanced scientific example, we had to develop ways in which we survive, and part of that survival was through, and I still think it's pretty valid as we look back and try to think about origins of scientific thinking and use of it to chimpanzees. And chimpanzees do that today. We did it many thousands of years ago. But I think that when you use the technique to get yourself some food, and then you teach it to your young, that's transferring information through a teaching mechanism that I think really qualifies for very basic scientific advancement. You can argue with me if you like, but I can see that coming from that stage, that very, very, you see birds doing some of the same kinds of things. We have examples of birds doing things that are very interesting as well. But I want you to ponder it more, Peter.
Bob, there was a series of TV shows a few years back, and they were examining the thinking process of pre-verbal infants. And they can monitor that by looking for the bigger register surprise or interest and so on. And what they concluded was that before they learn to talk, infants are very rational. They look for consistent, materialistic explanations of things that are happening. They show an example of pushing a, opening a little curtain, pushing a big hand, push a box off the table. If they arranged the box didn't fall, the baby was really sympathetic to that. And we worked out some theory, we said we did a test and found out what he was thinking. It's only after it learns to talk that an explanation that the gods are angry and that's why it's raining became useful. And that was a very good explanation until we try to do something about the weather, try to stop doing something about it.
Well, I agree with you that scientific thinking is innate. It's innate and it's in our genes. I don't think it's been explained that's in our genes yet, but I believe that we'll find real evidence that scientific thinking is in our genes. And it's a matter of the large, the size of our brain that these kinds of innate information. We have an innate language sense, for instance. We didn't have to wait until just 50,000 years ago when we had vocal cords change to actually have a mechanism in our brain to develop language. We never would have gotten this far if we had to wait for the gene to change in our brain. So they were in place. Those genes are in place, and I think that's what you're saying about infants, is that there's evidence that scientific thinking is indeed innate. Whereas I think mythological thinking is learned, it's cultural and it's learned. And that's why we have so many different stories around the world to explain how things came to be. Next question.
Hi, I'm wondering, as a biologist, I was just thinking, it seems to me that a lot of, well, for example, Christian religion, it just strikes me that I'm wondering what, originally started it, and I was thinking that when a person or a baby or whatever feels fear, whether they kind of fall back on the kind of reflexive almost idea that the parents or a parent will save them, okay? And so, and I think it's interesting that at one point in our development, most of the religions were, I guess, the goddesses were female, okay? And then at some point, maybe with the invention of agriculture and surpluses, so the men had a lot of time to sit around and make up things, that this switched to like male type gods, okay? And anyway, I just wonder if you think there's any relationship to this like response to like fear and anxiety. It's sort of like they based it on the model of the biological model that they were already familiar with of a father or a mother.
Well, I think that's certainly one of the things that helped them consolidate their power. And yes, I have no, I don't argue against what you said, but I think that we have to go back further than what you explained. I think you have to go back as far as you can press this issue to see the very origins of mythology. And it's so far back that some people are saying there's a God gene. Well, there's no, the book itself does not indicate any evidence for the God gene. But I think there's perfectly good evidence about a gene that's going to govern scientific thinking. Yes?
I think you make the point that mythology is man-made, and you also point to the men who make it, namely the priesthood. I think it would be a more persuasive argument if you would point to more detail about what's in it for these perpetrators.
Well, on other occasions I've discussed this as a business plan, and the business plan goes way back. And there's only a few people that were making the myths in the first place. It worked. They got to sit around and think about another myth. They were the mythologists. They were the myth generators. And they were few in number, it was the masses that had no education, as we went along, no education, no way to dispute it. What is the business, what is the business that if the business worked for you, that any CEO wants to give it up? They don't, and it's gone on from the very beginning until now. That's a terrific multinational business plan. So I don't see anything, I guess that's what you were getting at. Is that what you were getting at, or do you have something to do with it?
It's a living for these people.
Well, of course, it's a very good living. We built huge edifices to them. We have these beautiful, castles and cathedrals. And they're wonderful, a testament to our brains and our ability to build these things. And then these mythologists, these CEOs for each mythology, got to go in there and do a performance. It was a play, it was an act, it was a program. And so they had a beautiful living. They just walked around in dark clothes and did this and incantations to the supernatural being. And what a great living and what a great life. I think they had a very good working capitalist model plan. Somebody back there, yes, go ahead.
Well, there certainly is a genetic component to dissociation and a correlation between dissociation and absorption and belief in visionary experiences, which have a creative component and a supernatural belief-inducing ability. And have you done any work on hallucinogenic plants and reinforcing these kinds of experiences?
I'm not sure I got the question really clear. It is a creative process, I would say. You certainly made that point. And the microphone was not working well enough for me to actually hear. Would you take the microphone back to
Close talk. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Have you done any work on the genetic component of dissociation, which has been demonstrated, well demonstrated, and on hallucinogenic plants in reinforcing dissociation and supernatural belief?
All right, I get your point. And no, I'm not a geneticist. However, I take your point, and I think that Poppy, from my postgraduate work when I go over here to Stanford and take classes on extended education, I learned not too long ago in a class that I was taking that the poppy and its hallucinogenic aspects, hallucinogen, goes back a long, long way. And I don't know how far back it goes, but I have no doubt that, that curious kinds of human behavior fed into this mechanism of development of those myths. And I was saying poppy and opium is one of those. Yes.
Thank you for that really interesting talk. Some say that mythologies are not meant to be about truths or realities. They're meant to allow people to, one of the things they're meant to do is to allow people to cope or manage emotionally. I wonder if you think there's a relationship between our emotional needs and the use of either mythological or scientific thinking or methodology.
Well, yes, I think there is a relationship there, and I'm not sure that it isn't a negative one. One of the things that I recognize is that very religious people are very emotional. And one of the things that helped me, I grew up in a family that where my mother and my grandfather on my mother's side were very, very emotional people and very much involved in their understanding of what they thought religion was about. And so, yes, it did help them to cope. But what I have found, that I cope much better, I'm able to cope much better when I base my understanding of the world on rational scientific data rather than on emotional expressions of religion. I don't know if that answered your question very well or not, but that's my own personal experience. Yes.
I'm sorry, I was late. The part I heard was here in this, and all, their power is not used greatly. But there's a phenomenon that we have to explain, and I'd love to hear your comments on the phenomenon of Buddhism.
Yes, well, I'm not very able to comment on Buddhism because I've never been involved in meditation and their type of religion. I think that, from what little I want to know more about Buddhism than I do and want to answer the question. Maybe you do yourself.
It is a phenomenon. It has not been
What I know about Buddhism is that in meditation you're trying to get rid of essentially all of your interior feelings and emotions and essentially become a blank slate. And there was a presentation at the Trinity just a month ago at the Atheist Union in New York, where Daniel Dennett asked Sam Harris, because Sam Harris was talking about meditation and the value of it. And he asked Sam Harris, well, what can you point to anything that Buddhism has accomplished to, move the society forward or to give us a better understanding of life? And so Sam Harris, I guess, was stumped on that. And he did think that meditation was good for us. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wondered if you had a comment on this thought. It seems to me that thinking is obviously innate, perhaps scientific thinking, but the type of thinking that gets you out of these rat holes is, kind of this theocracy or whatever, is sort of long-term scientific thinking, and that doesn't seem to be innate and needs to be encouraged by society. You do the rain dance and it keeps working. You stop thinking for that period until the 7-year drought where it's clearly not working and they start thinking of another way, right? And then, if you start encouraging that, like with Nobel Prizes or patent systems or whatever, then maybe, this is what makes it, makes a difference, in a society that is not so theocratic, and one that
Are you suggesting Nobel Prize for rain dancers?
Well,
that are successful.
Prizes for some sort of reward system like that. Yeah, I was thinking about it, and I thought maybe the patent system is a really good thing for discouraging a theocracy.
Well, let me just tell you that I think that scientific education is the antidote to this. And I've also put out the idea that Darwin is an antidote to theology. But it's really unfortunate that our culture right now, the headlines in the paper last week, science in the lower grades almost extinct. So if we don't get scientific teaching back into our schools in a big way, our future for advancement seems, and keeping up with other nations, I suppose, it doesn't look very good. Now, science in my own life was what took me away from religion. Eventually, my studying science, it just went away, just like it did for Charles Darwin. Darwin was trained in religion, as you know, as he got into science and did all of the scientific thinking that he did. He described it as it just didn't matter anymore. He was free of it. It was gone. And I think that's a way in which we can get, move on to a better world, so to speak, and try to use scientific thinking to solve problems instead of wrestling with creationism. Another question?
Yes. It seems to me there are millions of people in the world who are receiving all kinds of comfort and security from the belief in God. And there's lots of research to back that up. Now, would you call that research mythology? And what would you do around that issue?
Well, I don't have any doubt that what people who believe in something, whether it's Mickey Mouse or God, if they really believe in them, and it gives them quietude in their heart, or the being, it can take away stress. If you can look at Mickey Mouse and get some quiet time and your brain in order, that seems to me that that's very helpful. And a lot of people, as you said, over the centuries have gained some very comforting things from what they regard, what their religion is. But I would still go back to you and say, well, we can't wrestle that away from the individual. It's a process that has to be modified over time. But I don't think that we should hesitate to talk about those things. That's one of the things that Dawkins and the other recent Harrison and some of the others have made it fashionable, at least for us to get out and talk about these things. But what's your, coming back to you, what do you think that is? I think that it is valuable for them to have some quietude, to get some relief from stress and so on. But I think you can do it much better with scientific, rational thinking.
Well, I'm not sure. How is the food? Barbara, are we ready? Ready? Well, let me ask one question right in the mic. They have done research with pigeons and other animals who are being fed intermittently, and it turns out that when they've been moving around and then they get the feed, they will then do that moving around thing. And some people claim, psychologists, that's teaching that that's superstition. That's how we understand superstition. You do something, it works, and therefore you take it. That's how it works. Something for you to think out over lunch. I assume you're going to join us today. Would you like to be first in line? Or?
I don't need to be first because I would enjoy talking with anybody that wants to talk.
Would you like to do the first lunch dance?
You want to do it for lunch? You want to do it during lunch? I just want more people have access to the lunch talking.
That's right about it.
This is a subject that I don't think I did a really great job of presenting it this morning, by the way. I didn't quite get it together. But on the other hand, I've done a lot of thinking here, and I want you to do it too, because I think it's so good for humanists to have a real solid base of how they think about why they're human. And to me, we've never unraveled this picture of where mythology actually came from. And I love this idea that our five senses are to blame, because it wasn't until we built the fancy instruments that we use in modern science so that we could make the God of the gaps very, very small. There's not much that we leave to him anymore other than what happened before the Big Bang or something. I mean, it's really mythology of supernaturalism is pretty much gone as far as those of us who understand science in a fairly substantial way. So it's a matter of teaching science, and I think we will be on our way to
Okay, that's
solving a lot of other problems.
That's it. Let us see.